Welcome back to the #1 TV show on the planet. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart. Both books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be reviewing Clockers by Richard Price, one of my favorite mystery writers of all time. I don't even know if you can call him a mystery writer. Just like an urban literary genius. That's what this guy is. So, this book came out in 1992. I read it about when it came out. I was pretty young at the time. It blew me away just with how, this thing is just a hard, gritty, streetwise, street smart story about the inner city, New York. Then the prose, it's just written, it sounds like it's written by like an urban Shakespeare. The writing is very gangsta, very gangster crook dialogue, and then the cops. Okay, let me slow down. Let's back up a little bit. Because we always start with reviewing the covers first. So let's just talk about the cover and the graphic design, because I like it. I like it a lot. It's just big and bold. There's nothing fancy about it. A nice photo of the... Wait. Is that upside down? The author photo? Hold on here. Oh, that's the way it goes. I've been holding the book upside down. I'm like, wait, the author photo's upside down. But I'd been holding the book upside down. We'll edit all of that bullshit out. Anyway, covers, okay, it's all right. I like it. 1992. Richard Price. If you want to know a little bit more about Richard Price, he was one of the screenwriters of the HBO show The Wire. So if you want to know what kind of flavor of writing you're getting into and you're familiar with the show The Wire, boom. It's exactly like that. Other writers that worked on The Wire that I've reviewed on the channel are Dennis Lehane, George Pelecanos, and Richard Price. They were the three kind of main sort of screenwriters of the entire Wire HBO show. So this is what this is about. In fact, this is so similar to The Wire. There's actually scenes in this book that was written in 1992 that I think were pulled from the book and actually put into the Wire TV show. And I didn't realize that until I just reread this a few days ago. And I've watched The Wire probably 6 times each episode. I've binge watched it like 6 times. It's one of my favorite shows. And there's a scene in The Wire where one of the cops is holding a young child up in the window looking down at the street, and it's the middle of the night, and they're listening to the street noise, and they're sort of saying this prayer like good night cops, good night firefighters, good night ambulance drivers. And there's a scene that was in The Wire. There's a scene in this book that's just like that, where Rocco the cop is holding his baby, and he's looking out the window, and he's like, good night taxi drivers, good night, bridges, good night crackheads, good night werewolves. It's an interesting that scene from this book in 92 made it into the Wire TV show. And there was a few others too, little nuggets, but it's just, what's this about? Well, it's kind of like, I compare it to a novel that I read. I usually don't review novels that I don't like on this channel. And there was a novel that I was reading recently that tried to do urban dialogue, and it just was failing. And it's a more modern writer and a more modern book that's come out, and I was just like, I stopped reading it. Like I said, if I stop reading a book because I don't like it, I'll never mention it on this channel, and I won't mention the name of the author or the title of the book, but I'm just saying, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy just ain't getting it. Because I work in the maximum security gang unit of the Utah State Prison. I get the cadence of street talk, of hood rat talk, of just the way that these gangsters and crooks and felons, I get the way that their speech patterns are. And that writer wasn't getting it, and I was just like, I just had to stop reading it. And then I remembered Clockers and all of the Richard Price books, and I'm like, now that's an author that has always done it absolutely 100% spot on. And so I was like, well, I got to read one of his books. And so that's why I picked this up. And So if you just want to read a book like that, I mean, I will read you a page from it, just so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about here. I marked a passage that I really thought was great and kind of describes what I'm talking about. So, Strike hissed out his disgust. Everybody was full of shit in this game. The cops bullshitted each other. The dealers bullshitted each other. The cops bullshitted the dealers. The dealers bullshitted the cops. The cops took bribes. The dealers ratted each other out. Nobody knew for sure what side anybody was on. No one really knew how much or how little money anybody else was making. Everything was smoke. Everything was payphones in the middle of the night. Being in this business was like walking blindfolded through a minefield. It was hard to know what to do or what not to do. But in order to survive, Strike went by 3 unbreakable rules. Trust no one. Don't get greedy, and never do product. Most people who lasted out here lived by the same rules as Strike did. Plus rule number 4, which was kind of a balancing act with rule number 1. You got to have somebody with your back. You got to have a main somebody to cover your ass. You don't have to trust him completely, but there's always something you'll need help with: bail, jail, collections, muscle, the impossibility of being in 2 places at one time. Strike didn't have anybody like that in his life yet, but he was thinking hard on it. That's kind of like describes sort of the street corner drug dealing gang life to a T. And Strike is our main character. And he is played. I also watched the movie. We'll talk about the movie too, because they made a movie of this, and it's pretty cool. Anyway, Strike is sort of a pretty savvy street corner sort of gangsta. If you remember in The Wire, they had a lot of those characters, and he is got a brother that sort of does the right thing. His brother does a good job. His brother has a job. His brother tries to live a normal life, whereas Strike is more leaning towards the gangster life. But he does respect his brother. Anyway, what happens is there's a murder, and the 2 main suspects in the murder are Strike and his brother, who's like basically a good dude. And Rocco, the cop that I mentioned earlier, was investigating that. That's basically the entire plot of the novel. And that's the whole thrust of everything. And we're just sort of along for the ride as we see the inner workings of the cop station. It's just like I said, it's a lot like The Wire. I think this is probably one of the reasons The Wire was even made, is because of a lot of stuff that was written in this book by Richard Price, along with a book called Freedom Land by Richard Price, which I'll probably review later. Anyway, Strike is an 18-year-old kid. His brother's a little bit older. There's a brutal murder. Rocco was trying to figure out whether it was his brother that did it or whether Strike did it. And Rocco and the rest of the police force are just kind of, sorry, I'm going to sneeze here any moment, but we'll edit that out for sure if it happens. It's just an absolutely riveting tale told with prose unlike anything you've ever read before. Richard Price really gets the inner city gangsta dialogue just down, and that's one of the beauties of reading this book. Is if you're not familiar with that, this book will easily familiarize yourself with it. I mean, within the first 5 pages of this book, you are going to know everything you need to know about selling drugs on a street corner. You will just he goes into detail after detail of the ins and outs of how that process works, and it's just fascinating to read. It's just, if you've never been around, like I kind of am around it just because of where I work at the prison. I just kind of know, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it, so I'm familiar with it. But he just nails all the details just down perfectly, and the mannerisms of all the players within it, including the police. It's just absolutely spot on accurate inner city life, and gritty and real, like The Wire. Now, if you want to watch the movie, because I said I would mention that too. The movie is, I would say the movie probably follows the book fairly well. I mean, Richard Price himself was the screenwriter of the movie, and Richard Price has been the screenwriter of a lot of really, really popular movies. So not only is a novelist, but he's been a screenwriter for a lot of like The Wire and other popular movies that you've seen, um, which I probably should have written down so I could mention them. But regardless, it's a Spike Lee movie. Also, Martin Scorsese produced. So right there, you got Spike Lee and Martin Scorsese involved in the movie. This book came out in '92. The movie came out in '95. It's just a great movie and follows the book fairly close. There are some differences. It's got Harvey Keitel as the cop. Some of the other cops are like the dude that played Christopher Moltisanti in The Sopranos, and John Turturro, and like a lot of the gangster actors are like Delroy Lindo, and there's just a great cast. It's just got an absolutely fantastic cast. They all do a great job. This book is near perfection. I mean, every word is just absolutely placed where it needs to be all the time. The dialogue just rings crystal clear to my ears, and I just absolutely loved it. And it's a gripping mystery novel on top of that. I mean, because you don't know how it's going to end, either the book or the movie. And so I give this a solid 10 out of 10. One of the better mystery novels you're ever going to read.